56 hours till the polls open. The leaders are campaigning for every single one of your votes. But what's really going on behind the scenes? Hello, welcome to Newsnight for your nightly interviews and insight, and we are going to bring you lots of both on the week when you decide who's going to run our country for the next 5 years. Tonight we have the man who compiles the exit poll, which you will see at 10 p.m. this Thursday on the BBC One election programme, Professor Sir John Curtis, and that should give us, we hope, the first accurate forecast of the election result. We also have Harriet Harman, former Labour Minister, former Labour Deputy Leader and an MP for over 40 years. She is standing down this time. And we have Sir Craig Oliver, former Director of Communications for Prime Minister David Cameron. Welcome all of you. Thank you for being with us. And Nick is here as always. Right, cards on the table. I'm after numbers, please. Sir Craig Oliver, what would be a best and worst case scenario for the Conservatives politically this Thursday?
I think the Conservative Party fortunes have fallen so far that if they got around 170 seats, that would be considered a good result for them.
Right now they have 344.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a significant drop, but I think that the way in which the narrative have gone, if they got 170 seats, people would say, look, that's something that you can build from. I think if they're getting down to 100 and below, that will be obviously be considered a complete disaster for them.
Harriet Harman, best and worst case scenario in terms of numbers for Labour politically?
Well, a good case scenario is actually winning a majority, because the last time the public had the chance to vote in the general election in 2019, they elected 162 more Tory MPs than Labour MPs. So there's a lot of people that need to change their minds. But actually it'd be good, a best case scenario, if we have a big majority so that we can actually just deliver our manifesto, because one of the things that people don't like is faffing about revolts, horse trading. They will want us to get on with the job and deliver our manifesto, and a big majority enables us to do that.
Labour's majority in 97 was 179. I'm sure you remember it exactly. A landslide with 418 seats, the highest ever won by Labour. Are you expecting to beat that?
I really couldn't say at this point. And also the other thing is that opinion polls have never changed the government, only votes have. And I know that's a bit of a kind of old-fashioned view, but we've still got to wait for people to vote. And, you know, there's a lot of voter suppression going on from the Conservatives, and we want people to actually have their say. OK, Sir John Curtis, by historical standards, how well are Labour doing? How well are the Conservatives doing?
Well, if you take as one possible judgment is what's the share of the vote that looks as though, if the opinion polls are right, Labour are heading for, and how does that compare with particularly when previously Labour have gained power for the first time as a result of an election. So at the moment the polls are giving them about 40%, which, by the way, is a little bit less than Jeremy Corbyn got in 2017. But Tony Blair in 1997 got 43%, Harold Wilson in 1964 got 45%, and Clement Attlee back in 1945 got 49%. So although it's quite possible that Labour might, in terms of a majority, do better than any of those previous occasions, because it looks as though the electoral system is going to work in their favour. In terms of share of the vote, it doesn't look as though it will be a particularly remarkable performance.
So are you saying they could get a big-ish majority with a smaller vote share than Jeremy Corbyn in 2019?
Correct, because of course the difference is that Jeremy Corbyn still didn't manage to have more votes than Theresa May in 2017, whereas now we've got the Conservatives 20 points behind. We have to remember that if the polls are right in about 20%, this will be the worst Conservative performance by far in any British election going all the way back to 1832.
I understand. Nick, where Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer have been visiting today in this final week gives us quite a bit of intel and insight, doesn't it?
Well, you can tell a lot from where the leaders visit. I can let you in on a secret. I remember when David Cameron launched the 2015 campaign, he got off his bus in Chippenham in Wiltshire, which was then a Liberal Democrat seat. I thought, why is he not in Bury? One of his leading aides got off the bus. I said, what are you doing here? And this leading aide said to me, this is how we win this election. I can reveal, I'm sure he won't mind, that leading aide was Craig Oliver. And I didn't realise it at the time, but Craig had basically given to me on a plate the Conservative election campaign, which was to take out the Liberal Democrats in the southwest. They did that, and that is how David Cameron got his majority. So there are new seats, new boundaries now, so you can't make exact comparisons with the last election of those seats, but you can do an implied result. It is implied that this is what the result will be. And from today, every seat that Keir Starmer visited, Labour lost in 2019, and every seat that Rishi Sunak visited, the Conservatives won in 2019. So what we see is an offensive campaign by Keir Starmer hoping to make big gains, and a defensive campaign from Rishi Sunak hoping to avoid big losses. So firstly, let's see where Keir Starmer went. So he went to Hitchin. That is a new seat. Now that was won by the Conservative. Implied result, 50.1% of the vote in 2019. Keir Starmer also went to the new seat of Buckingham and Bletchley. That, the implied result there in 2019 was 52.9% for the Conservatives. And finally, he went to Banbury, new boundaries there. Conservative implied win there was 52%. New bit of that constituency, Chipping Norton, who lives there, the former Foreign Secretary, so he's hoping that David Cameron will have a Labour MP. So in other words, Keir Starmer, every seat he visited, the Conservatives won by 50% or more. Where did Rishi Sunak go? He went to Stoke-on-Trent South, new boundaries. Implied Conservative result there last time, 63.9% of the vote. He went to Stratford-upon-Avon, new boundaries. What's the implied result there in 2019? 60.3%. He went to Nuneaton, new boundaries. What's the implied result there in 2019? 60.6% of the vote. And finally, Prime Minister went to Hinckley and Bosworth, new seat. What's the implied Conservative vote there in 2019? 63.9%. So in other words, every seat that Rishi Sunak went today, the Conservatives achieved 60% or more, and that's where the Prime Minister believes he needs to expend Conservative energy.
What do you think of that, Sir Craig Oliver?
Well, look, it's a sign that the Conservative Party is getting exactly the same polling that everybody else is getting, which is they're in serious trouble and that they have to have an extraordinarily defensive strategy.
OK. I want to ask you about something that the Conservatives appear to be jumping on today, which is comments Keir Starmer made to Virgin Radio, where he talked about carving out family time or continuing to carve out family time on a Friday should he become Britain's next Prime Minister.
Yes, so what Keir Starmer was saying there is that he doesn't schedule any official events after sort of 6 o'clock on a Friday, and if he becomes Prime Minister he would want to maintain that, and the reason why he would want to maintain that is he regards family time and family with his children as incredibly important. What he means by that is he won't be scheduling a rally at 6 o'clock on Friday. He won't be scheduling a cabinet subcommittee meeting on a Friday evening. But those sort of things don't happen anyway. But his aides are making absolutely clear that, of course, if you're Prime Minister, you are on duty 24/7. You have your team with you all the time. You always have a private secretary with you. You always have the telephone if you need it. Of course, they say he's on duty. And they say that they're not too sure about these Conservative attacks on him because 2 weeks ago, Rishi Sunak, they say, was asked, what do you admire most about Keir Starmer? And Rishi Sunak said, I admire his work-life balance and the way he manages to help his children.
But James Cleverly, Home Secretary, on social media, Harriet Harman today, is saying if you don't want to do the work, don't apply for the job, criticising Sir Keir Starmer for what he said today.
Well, I think that is just ridiculous. I mean, of course, when he's with his children and his wife on a Friday evening, he's still Prime Minister. And if something happened, you know, he's on call. So I just think it's the idea that he's not a hard-working person after all he's achieved is faintly ludicrous, really.
OK. In a moment, we're going to hear from a Conservative minister. First, we're going to talk about the exit poll that Professor Curtis and his team compile for BBC One viewers, which you will see at 10 p.m. this Thursday. It's always quite a moment. He's been doing it for years. Watch closely, and you can see him here on the BBC's election programme back in 1979.
Well, welcome back to those of you who've been away in your own part of the country, looking at your own results. Those of you who are in Scotland will probably have heard by now that Bruce Millen, the Secretary of State, is back in his constituency, but the swing was only 0.5% there.
You had a lot of hair at one point, Professor Sir John Curtis. You can see how observant I am.
But you know, this was 45 years ago. Actually, the story there is that we're back in the days of mainframe computers. I mean, there are no such things as PCs or laptops, all right? And occasionally, mainframe computers would kind of take a coffee break. And my job was to have a programmable calculator. You have a calculator in those days which you could program. And my job was that if the mainframe computer were to break down, which in the event it did not, I should be able to tell David instantly, David Buckley was sitting doing the programme there, what the swing was in a constituency that had just been declared. Okay. So that was my first entry to the BBC.
Can you briefly explain what an exit poll is and how you compile it?
Right, so the exit poll is conducted by getting interviewers, interviewers recruited by Ipsos, who are standing outside around 130 polling stations, so a relatively small number, scattered across the country, and basically people who leave that polling station, a sample of them are geared, look, here's a mock ballot paper looking exactly like the one you've just completed. Would you mind completing that for me and popping it in this mock ballot box? Right, and that's all the person is asked and what they're required to do.
So it's immediately after somebody has actually voted.
Correct. Now, the difficulty, without getting too much detail, the difficulty of doing exit polls in the UK is that unusually we don't count ballot papers in polling stations. We take them all to a central place and mix them all together, which makes it very, very difficult to use an exit poll to estimate the share of the vote for any parties, because you don't know whether they're representative. So what we do, therefore, is we actually use the exit poll to estimate not the share that the parties are getting, but the change in their share since last time. How do we do that? By, wherever possible, going to the same places that we used the exit poll in last time. So it's not one exit poll, it's two. It's comparing the one this time with the exit poll last time. That gives you 130 estimates of change in vote share, which you can then turn into basically a forecast. OK,
in 2019, Reform did not stand in lots of seats where they were up against Tory.
Correct.
So how do you factor that in this time?
Well, because one of the things that we will statistically model the changes, and you can imagine that one of the variables that almost is bound to go into the model that's estimating the Conservative performance is this was a seat that the Brexit Party did not fight in 2019.
OK, so they haven't always been accurate. This is 1992 where it was inaccurate, and 2017 where it was accurate. Any minute now.
10 o'clock. And our view is it's going to be a hung parliament. This election is too close to call. We're saying it could be from the Conservatives short by 10 of an overall majority, to Labour, the largest party, and short by 13 of an overall majority. And by the magic of psephology, we're able to predict what we think has happened tonight. And what we're saying is the Conservatives are the largest party. Note, they don't have an overall majority at this stage. 314 for the Conservatives. That's down 17.
So, as I said, inaccurate in 1992 because actually John Major had a majority of 21. You've changed the polling, the methodology, I should say, and since 92 it's been pretty much on the money.
Actually, that wasn't that far off, but anyway, 1992, right? It still had the Conservatives the largest party.
I'm so sorry to say this to you.
But equally in 2015, to be honest, we did not say that David Cameron was necessarily going to get an overall majority.
To be fair to John, I was editor of the BBC election programme in 2010, and the folklore was that actually the exit poll was a lot closer, but the editorial people fudged the numbers, which is why you got that range. So actually, you're warned when you become editor of the election night programme, go with what you're told. Go with what the people are saying, because actually in 92 they didn't quite, and they fudged it, and ever since then everybody's gone on about it being wrong.
Right.
But what I think is interesting is I've got two experiences of exit polls, one as a BBC editor and one on the other side as David Cameron's Director of Politics and Communications.
In 2015.
And both times when the exit poll came in, people refused to believe them because the narrative of the campaign had been so strong, they refused to believe. So in 2010, the Liberal Democrat number of seats had gone down, and literally you had 2 hours of BBC reporters and analysts and everybody saying this is a load of rubbish. And my memory of that is being over-talked back saying, stop saying the exit poll's wrong because it doesn't look like it is. And then in 2015, it was predicted that the Conservatives would have enough seats to form a government, but a lot of people thought, actually, this can't be right either. We think that...
Didn't Paddy Ashdown go on and say he was going to eat his hands?
Yes, Andrew Neil gave him a marzipan hat to eat. Yes,
he said he was going to eat his hat if the exit polls
that
were
twice.
right.
The third time he didn't challenge us.
So if the exit poll is different to the polling through the campaign,
exactly, yes.
you have to keep your mind open on that.
People become very, very fixed to a narrative.
Yeah.
And so what was interesting, Nick telling me that I'd come off the bus and said to him that we went to the West Country 36 times during that campaign. I was never once asked about the strategy of pressing to win Lib Dem seats. All I was asked about, and all David Cameron was asked about to campaign, is can you form a government? Are you actually going to just be in another coalition? In fact, it was a majority.
Sure.
So the tension between the polls and the campaign and what actually happens is very real.
But of course, in winning that majority and reducing the Liberal Democrats so successfully, you ensured that you had a referendum that many of us suspect that Mr. Cameron never really wanted to hold in the first place.
John, is this your right?
Harriet Harman, you have witnessed successes for Labour in terms of exit polls. You have experienced failures. What is that moment like for you as a politician at 10 p.m? Well,
there's something about those chimes. When those chimes start and you know the exit poll is about to drop, then that is the huge moment. But what an irony that clutching the Lib Dems close to them, which is what the Tories did with the coalition, and then went after them when they became unpopular and won all their seats. Nice business, isn't it?
It's called politics.
It's ruthless. It's brutal.
But the exit poll is absolutely huge for all of us. It's
a moment.
It's a moment.
Tomorrow we are going to bring you an interview with a senior shadow cabinet minister. Today we're going to hear from the Conservatives. We are going to talk to Home Office Minister Chris Philp. Hello, Mr. Philp. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for talking to our audience this evening. Campaigning's not over, and we can tell because the Conservatives have posted 2 tweets today on X, on the official Tory Twitter feed. The first one says, "You've got 3 days to protect your house. The only way to save yourself from Labour's home tax is to vote Conservative on the 4th of July. 1 hour later, your party posted another one saying Labour will tax your family home. Vote Conservative on the 4th of July. I wanted to ask you, Mr. Philp, what are you claiming actually is Labour's home tax?
Well, there's a whole range of tax rises which the Conservatives have expressly ruled out, but the Labour Party have not ruled out.
And what is Labour's home tax that you're claiming?
Well, there are things like capital gains tax that applies to the principal residence. There's stamp duty that applies to your home purchase. There's council tax bans, all of which the Conservatives have ruled out making any changes to. In fact, with stamp duty, we're going to relieve stamp duty completely for first-time buyers up to 425,000. Okay. But none of those tax changes, despite being repeatedly pressed and challenged, and despite ruling out other tax changes when asked, those tax changes and many others, the Labour Party have not ruled out.
OK. And we know let me pause you right there. Labour have ruled out both imposing capital gains tax on people's family home, and they have ruled out re-evaluating council tax bans. So you're wrong.
Well, when Rachel Reeves was asked about that a couple of weeks ago, she did not expressly rule it out. In fact, what she said to the studio in an interview was she said, "I'm not going to write 5 years worth of budgets before we've even had an election." So she's quite clearly leaving herself the option to raise these taxes, quite clearly.
The leader is Sir Keir Starmer. He told The Telegraph and the BBC, when asked if he would explicitly rule out capital gains tax, he said, absolutely. It was never a policy, so it doesn't need ruling out. So let's rule it out in case anybody pretends that it was. Then Jonathan Ashworth told Times Radio and Sky News, we're not changing council tax banding, we're not doing council tax rebanding.
Well, Rachel Reeves is the Shadow Chancellor, and when she was interviewed a couple of weeks ago, she said, as I gave you the quote a second ago, she said she didn't rule it out, and she said, I'm not going to write 5 years worth of budgets.
Because the leader ruled it out. The leader of Labour ruled it out.
Hang on, there's the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, categorically, when explicitly asked, categorically not ruling it out. And we've seen from the analysis that was done and debated extensively 4 or 5 weeks ago that there are those, I think it's 19 Labour spending pledges offset by 8 revenue raisers that have a £38 billion hole, which means the average family over the next Parliament will pay £2,000, £2,094 in extra taxation, which we went through in detail a few weeks ago.
Yeah, Mr. Philp, those figures, as you know, have been widely ridiculed. The top civil servant at the Treasury said specifically, do not present those figures as though they have been compiled by impartial civil servants. I just wonder, with 3 days to go...
Hang on, 21. He was talking about the totals. So it's true the civil servants didn't add them up, but 21 of those 27 measures were costed by Treasury officials, 21 of the 27. And in addition to that, I think about 3 or 4 more came from government departments. 2 of them came from the Labour Party themselves, and 1 of them came from an investment bank. So that it is extremely well sourced, and it's extremely clearly laid out as a public document. If you Google it, your viewers and your listeners can find it.
Sure.
And it adds up to a £38 billion black hole over the course of the next Parliament, which is about £2,000 per working household that can only be paid for by tax increases. And that's why it's important to press the Labour Party on which taxes they're going to put up. And when Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, declines to rule it out, it's pretty clear why. It's because they've got a black hole.
Mr. Philp, is this how desperate you are now? You're literally making things up.
Well, that's absolute nonsense. I've just explained to you. There's a document which any of your viewers can easily Google, which lays out what these 19 spending pledges and 8 revenue raisers made by the Labour Party are. The numbers are there. There's a table which goes through it in forensic detail. And I'd say 21 of those 28 were costed by the Treasury, and the rest are extremely credibly sourced, a couple of them from the Labour Party itself.
Mr. Sunak posted this today on his Twitter feed. Labour will take more of your money. Labour will raise your taxes. Don't surrender your family's finances to Labour. Isn't that a bit Isn't that a bit rich when A, taxes are the highest under your government since World War II, B, your own Prime Minister Liz Truss frightened the financial markets and helped push up people's mortgages, and C, Mr. Sunak did not stay until the end of the D-Day commemorations on June the 6th?
Well, let me just make a couple of points. Firstly, the rates of tax, so the percentage you pay for working people, are the lowest they've ever been. Now, you're right to say that the total tax burden is high. That is because we're paying back the cost of the interventions during the COVID pandemic, when we spent... Can I please finish the point? When we spent as a country £400 billion paying people's wages with furlough, supporting businesses with bounce back loans, making sure the economy didn't collapse. Now, that £400 billion of support, which enabled people and businesses to survive, does have to be paid back. Now we're getting through that, we are able to start cutting taxes. So we've already cut national insurance by 4%. That's £900 for the average working family. We're going to go further and cut it by another 2%. And overall, over the next Parliament, by the end of the next Parliament, we're committed to cutting taxes by £17 billion per year. By contrast, the tax rises that Labour admit to, that's laying to one side the £2,000 per family we talked about, but what they've admitted to is £8 billion of tax rises, no tax cuts at all, not a single one in the Labour Party manifesto. So the difference between the Labour and Conservative plans on tax is £25 billion a year. And that is why the point the Prime Minister was making is a completely reasonable one.
But what we do know is, because the IFS have told us, if the Conservatives win the election, the overall tax take will rise from where it is now. Here's a graph for our viewers, which you won't be able to see, Mr. Philp, but our viewers can see it.
I'm not sure if you're showing the whole 5 years, but it will rise slightly in the first 2 years and it will go down thereafter. So if you're being fair, you will have shown the whole 5-year period, showing it declining towards the end of that period.
As a share of GDP. But it will be higher than it is now, under both a Conservative government and a Labour government.
But it'll be so it declines towards the end of the Parliament, which hopefully your chart shows. But the difference, the gap between the Labour tax plans, which they've admitted to, there are more on top of that they haven't admitted to, but based on the ones they've admitted to, and the Conservative tax cut proposals, there is a £25 billion a year difference. So just to be clear, the average family will pay on the admitted to policies, £1,000 more under Labour than the Conservatives, with another £2,000 on top of that that's undeclared, that's analysed in the document that I've referred to already. That is a big difference in what families will pay in tax under Labour compared to the Conservatives. And that's why this tax point is so important.
Sure. Thank you very much for your time this evening, Mr Philp. We appreciate it. Chris Philp, who is Home Office Minister. Sir Craig Oliver, you were Director of Communications with David Cameron when he was Prime Minister. The language about surrender, what do you think?
I can understand why they're doing it. I mean, I think that they're trying to create... It's effectively what the Conservative Party's done over the last 10 days is accept they're going to lose. And what they're trying to say to people is, look, your vote can make a difference in terms of reducing how much power the Labour Party has. I actually have a sort of different view on the tax thing. I'm surprised that the Labour Party is just going round, whenever the Conservative Party says you're going to raise this tax, they're just shutting everything down. And it seems to me that the reality of the economic situation going forward over the next 5 years is, rather than restricting yourself, you need to give yourself some leeway. And actually the Labour Party is just reacting every time the Conservatives say, you'll raise taxes on this, raise that. No, we won't. Of course we won't, we won't. And that's on record. And in the next couple of years, you're going to be putting that to Labour ministers, I'm sure, and pointing out what they said during the election campaign. They are restricting their ability to govern, and I think that's going to be a real problem.
Harriet Harman?
Well, I think they are, because they know that people are worried about the amount of money that they've got in their pocket. They know they're worried, and they know they need to reassure them. But I think they will have every intention of keeping those promises, like we did in 1997, when it was very difficult to stick to the Tory spending limits, which had put into the government programme cuts
but come on,
in
Harriet,
things,
that's a totally
and it was
different
very
situation.
hard to do that. And we promised not to put up taxes.
No, but in 1997, Ken Clarke bequeathed the golden economy. Exactly. You had a very, very easy time in that Parliament. This is not a golden economy. It's not the same thing at all.
But the situation for the public, and certainly it is worse, but by the same token, it's worse for individual families at the moment, and therefore they need to be reassured that they're not ordinary families and not going to pay more in tax.
Neither the Conservative nor the Labour Party have cottoned on to is that the public have not reacted against the expansion of the state in the way that you are both imagining that they are doing. And at the moment, at least, all the polling evidence suggests that the public are much more concerned about the state of the health service than public services than they are about the level of taxation. And frankly, as far as the Conservatives are concerned, they would be much better spending the money on increasing the amount of money on the health service that they spent on tax cuts, ending the junior doctor strike and getting waiting times down. Because it looks as though until that problem is solved, the public's priority lies there and not with the level of taxation.
Well, Rachel Reeves, as Shadow Chancellor, actually believes that the way that she's suggesting we should be dealing with the situation is best for the economy. It's not just a political judgment about people
So are you telling me that you would be proposing, if the Conservatives had not reduced national insurance by 4p in the course of the last 6 months, are you telling me that in this campaign the Labour Party will be campaigning for a 4p cut in national insurance?
Well, I can't actually say that hypothetically, but I would say that there's two reasons why Rachel Reeves has done what she's done. One is to reassure the public, and secondly, because that's how she thinks the economy should be managed. And you might disagree with her, but that is the view she's put forward, and I think the public watching it knows their finances have been in problem, and they're making a judgment about Rachel Reeves is that she's being fiscally very, very prudent, and that she will carry on being like that. And with the proceeds of growth that she expects to achieve. Well, you know, if you have stability, which we haven't had, if you actually have reform and you have investment, we will have economic growth.
Maybe
Sir John, let Harriet Harman finish the sentence. Let Harriet Harman finish the sentence.
We had to stick, for 2 years, we had to stick to no increase of taxes and cuts in public spending in 1997. That was painful then. Craig Oliver might say, well, it was absolutely fine, but it was painful then for us. We felt we needed to do it, and then we put things on a better trajectory afterwards.
I really genuinely think it's extraordinary that you're comparing the economy in 97 to what it is now. It is a completely different ballgame. And I also think, I understand that you've got to...
Don't put words in my mouth. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying there's a political view about people's concerns, and there's a sense of how you run the economy prudently.
And I also think that, to finish the sentence, that I think that you're giving the Labour Party way too much credit. They appear to me to be a party which is desperate to get over the the line at 10 o'clock on Thursday night and actually has not put any flesh on the bones about what they're actually going to do going forward. It has been purely a campaign approach, and there's very, very limited.
Trust me, Rachel Reeves has been qualified to be Chancellor, as far as I can see, since she was about 14 years old, and I've known her since then. And she has a serious fiscal approach. The idea that she's done this on the back of a political envelope, I think, is completely misjudged.
I think that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the Labour Party at the moment seems to be 100% campaigning and very little about what it's actually going to do in government. And I think most people watching this programme would quite like to have an idea about what that's going to be, because at the moment all they're doing is ruling everything out without actually positively saying what
I'm going to tell you what's in the...
know what the departmental spending plans will be that have to be made up this coming October.
All right, quick look at tomorrow's front pages. Daily Express, voting reform, quote, risks losing hundreds of Tory MPs for a generation. The Times, Starmer, a big majority will be the best for Britain. The Eye, Labour faces up to the prospect of a far-right neighbour in France with early talks. The Guardian, Labour would take the global lead on the climate. That's Ed Miliband. The Daily Telegraph, Royal Mail, blame for postal vote chaos. And the Daily Star, England hero Jude Bellingham facing a ban after a fun sponge footy chiefs launch probe into cheeky hand gesture. The headline is, "Oh, balls." I missed it. I was watching the game, but I didn't see him do that. UEFA have launched an investigation. They may fine him. They may ban him. Seems very unlikely. Does it feel proportionate?
I mean, I think you're going to struggle to find many England fans who think of him as anything other than a national hero.
Totally.
But the most interesting front page there is the Daily Express. The Daily Express saying vote Conservative, not reform.
Yes. Thank you, all of you, very much. We appreciate your time. Professor Sir John Curtis, Harriet Harman, Sir Craig Oliver. Thank you, Nick, as always. That's all from us tonight. I'm back tomorrow, as is Nick. Thanks for your company. Good night.